Hey guys, and welcome to my world building vlog. So my name is Erin and I'm a writer. I'm working on several fantasy pieces right now, so I'm just doing a world building vlog series, kind of going over some of the things that I've had to figure out for my stories and passing that along to you guys. So today's topic is transport and travel. This is going to come into play into any story that you have where your characters have to get from point A to point B. A lot of times this is a central part of the story whenever you have the hero's journey. This is very present in stories like Lord of the Rings, where Frodo has to get from the Shire to Mordor. Travel is a big thing in a lot of fantasy stories, simply because a lot of times the technology levels are very reduced from modern day. So in a lot of cases, you're relying on walking and horses, which means things take a lot longer, it's a lot harder to get places, and you can introduce a lot more conflict along the way. One thing you want to figure out is, how are people getting around? Once you figured that out, how are your characters getting around? Because they might not fit the exact model that you have for the average person. A lot of times people who are wealthier would have horses, carriages, anything that's a little bit more expensive to maintain would be available to them, but if your character is middle class or lower, then they might not have access to the same resources. You also want to know, are there any restrictions to any specific modes of transport? If you have any sort of magical creature, maybe none of them are allowed to be used for transport. Dragons, Pegasi, that sort of things. There could be restrictions on those. Even just general groups of people not being allowed to ride horses, maybe specific roads or areas are banned, all that kind of thing. That'll kind of restrict how your characters are able to get places. You want to figure out if your world is going to have actually a developed transport system. Do they have roads? Do they use rivers and oceans to get places? Do they have trains? Do they have planes? Any sort of way to get around? Does your world have it? If your characters are going to be crossing any sort of borders, what is the border security like? What are the borders in general like? Some of them are going to be hostile, some peaceful. Some are going to be natural divisions such as mountains or rivers, and some of them are just going to be basically arbitrary, that have no bearing on the geography and just this is where it is. One thing that I see a lot of people kind of struggling with is the concept of how long it takes to get places. A lot of times people will have horses running all day. It's not possible unless it's a magic horse, in which case, do you. But in most cases, horses are not going to travel much more than 30 miles in a day, which is really the same amount that people can travel. What you're also going to want to consider is, if you have a really long distance to travel, constant movement at the maximum, if they're going top speed, top distance every single day, it's going to wear on people and animals very quickly. So you may want to take that into consideration. Say your people have to walk 200 miles. They might be able to easily do 30 miles the first few days, but eventually you're going to start getting muscle fatigue, injuries, blisters, all that jazz is going to slow people down. If they're traveling with any sort of cargo, wagons, carriages, etc., then it's going to be taking a lot longer because those things are not as easily maneuverable. You also want to consider if they're able to travel by roads. A lot of times main roads in history were set upon by bandits because people were easy pickings. They had to move slowly. If they had a lot of wealth, it was pretty obvious that they did. Probably your fastest method of travel, if you're not including magic, is going to be sea travel, because it can keep going 24 hours a day as long as you have someone to pilot, basically. Usually, you're going to get about 100 miles or so in a day from traditional sailing vessels. These numbers are obviously going to change based on, how you're traveling, if you have completely flat roads versus if you're going through mountains, what sort of technology is available, and what sort of vehicles your characters are using. If you are making people or animals run, keep in mind that that is not a sustainable form of travel. They might be able to cross a short distance very quickly, but they're not able to keep that up. One thing you can also consider is, just for travel in general, is there any place in your fantasy world that people go to take vacations, to relax? Are seaside towns really common where people just go and enjoy the weekend, if the weekend exists in your world? Are there places that are specifically designed to be basically resort towns? Or do people not have vacations? Do they not travel? What are the restrictions like in your world? In a lot of history, people were born and died in the same town. The furthest they could get was how far they could walk and get back in a day. So you may want to consider this if your characters don't have a lot of resources or opportunity, if they live in small towns, then a lot of the people probably haven't been anywhere. The difficulty with travel in your world is going to influence how open the different societies are. Places that are isolated kind of develop at their own pace. But if you have a lot of connecting trade routes, if it's really easy to get from small towns to the big cities or to the coast so people can get wherever they want to go, then it's going to be a lot more dynamic than if people are completely isolated. This is where your geography and landscape is going to come in really handy because it's going to very heavily influence how your characters are able to get places. If you have mountains in the way, rivers in the way, long, endless prairies in the way, those are all going to be factors in how your characters are able to move about your world. So consider geography, climate, landscape, transportation systems, and resources when you're figuring out any sort of hero's journey in your world, because those are all going to be extremely important and heavily influence what happens to your characters along the way. So that's all I've got for you guys today on transport and travel. I hope some of that was helpful. I will put links to all of my social media in the descriptions. Feel free to hit me up there, and I will see you guys next Wednesday. Thanks for watching. Bye, guys.